Good morning, everyone, and welcome to EAB University. I'm Robin Usborne. I am coming to you from Michigan State University, and along with Cliff Sadoff and Elizabeth Barnes from Purdue University and Amy Stone from Ohio State University, we welcome you to today's presentation, Forest Invaders to Watch For and How to Manage Them. Part 1, Emerald Ash Borer, Thousand Cankers Disease, and Asian Longhorned Beetle. This presentation is coming your way from our experts, Elizabeth Barnes and Cliff Sadoff, and from Carrie Tresher from Indiana Department of Natural Resources. They will be sharing their info with you. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you that we welcome your questions and comments today. So please type them into the chat pod or the Q&A pod, and we will answer those questions once the presentation is done. Tomorrow, I will be sending out a survey that we hope that you will fill out so we can keep these webinars coming to you. As well, for those of you wanting CEUs, we need you to fill out that survey, and I will also be giving you information on how to contact Elizabeth Barnes so that you can request those CEU credits for watching the live webinar. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available for viewing afterward on the www.emeraldashborer.info page website, and it will be on the EAB University page there, and that's pretty easy link to find. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cliff and to start today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everybody. So today, I thought it would be good for us to kick off this by starting off by reviewing what is an invasive species. So, invasive species are a class of pest, all right? And it's a type of pest that the species we're talking about today, they come from another continent. They're not native to here. And what they do is that they're pests because they destroy something that we like. So for example, if you look at these very beautiful roses that we have over here, the invasion of Japanese beetles turns them into basically from beautiful rose flowers into a rose slaw, so to speak, okay? And there's nothing but chewed rose petals. So, by definition, these pests are things that we consider bad because they destroy things that are of value to us. But this particular webinar series is about forest pests, not about roses, so I'll switch gears and talk about ash trees. And I'm sure by now most of all you have heard of the emerald ash borer. And it kills pretty much nearly every single untreated ash tree. And what we have in front of us, the tree on the left has been protected with an insecticide, but the rest, these dead trees have been killed by the emerald ash borer. I just want to backtrack a little bit. The purpose of this whole webinar is to get you to recognize early symptoms and signs of some of the more problematic pests that we're concerned with so that you can report them, so that we can take action early in the invasion cycle and hopefully protect more of our forest. So how does emerald ash borer kill trees? Well, emerald ash borer adult beetles will in fact feed on leaves. And as a matter of fact, the adult female over here needs to feed on leaves in order to mature her eggs. But as much as she can eat, she cannot cause the kind of
Hey, Cliff, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Whoops, he got kicked off right there. Hold on, folks. We'll see what's happening here.
What?
There you go. There you are, Cliff. We lost you for a little while.
Oh no.
So
okay. All right. So
you were on the slide about how EAB kills ash trees. Can you go back to that?
I am. How did EAB? Is that what you see?
No, you need to share your screen again.
Okay. All right. So okay. Sorry. Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, I am exit minimize video. I'm not seeing it now. Can you hear me?
Yep. So you should be available to find yourself somehow.
Yeah, I can't. So I go back to Zoom.
Okay.
And when I click up to Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
I get a small minimized screen here.
Okay.
Exit minimize video. Nope. More participants. Share screen. How's that?
Yes.
Working. Okay. And I should say share screen 2.
And then you just go,
Go back to from current slide. All right. Start from the slide. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Beetles. Thank you. Adult beetles do not defoliate trees. It's the larvae that basically cut up the. What they do is they destroy the tissue called xylem, which actually takes the water from the roots to the leaves, and they cause the tree to dry out and die. Right now, what you can be looking for is you should be looking for woodpecker feeding, and this is a bark that you see over here has been pretty much stripped of the outer bark, and you see nothing but the little holes over here. And in the extreme, you can see when the woodpeckers are really active, and they are active pretty much in the winter time and late spring. This looks like a self-mulched ash tree. It's actually all the bark chips that have been falling down. So if you see something like this, this is usually a bad sign, and that tree's probably stone dead. Another thing you want to look for would be vertical splits in the trunk, as you see here. And if you would peel away part of that bark, you would see the S-shaped galleries beneath where the insect had been feeding. Then once the beetle finishes its development, it'll chew holes through the bark and leave these D-shaped exit holes. So if you see trees with obvious woodpecking injury, D-shaped exit holes, vertical splits, that's a pretty good sign. In a few weeks, you would look for thinning canopies, basically trees which do not leaf out completely. The top over here of this tree is fairly thin, and that can be followed on some trees by the appearance of these water sprouts or epicormic shoots that come out from the bottom, which is the last gasp attempt to allow these trees to have the trees survive. So questions people might want to ask is like whether or not they should treat their trees. Clearly, trees that have lost more than 50% of their canopy should not be treated. Trees that have lost about only 10 or 20% of their canopy can be protected with insecticide. The 30% thin is on the bubble, depending on the shape of the tree and whether or not the tree is still structurally sound. We have a bulletin that we put out here called Insecticide Options for Protecting Ash Trees from Emerald Ash Borer. We list all the products that work, and basically what happens is that the insecticides will, when you put them into the ground or you inject the tree, they cause the leaves to become poisoned, which kills the adult beetles before they lay eggs. And then the material that's inside the tree, underneath the trunk, will actually get to the larvae and kill them as they're chewing. So there's a number of recommendations inside there. It's very possible to protect trees and keep them alive. One of the things you have to remember at this point in time is that dead ash trees are indeed a threat to public health. Here we see a tree with all the symptoms that you're going to see. You'll see the thinning canopy, the water sprouts, but when the leaves are all gone and the tree's dead, this is very dangerous because it's styrofoam brittle. We have a webinar, we did it last year on April 2nd, almost about a year ago, where we talk about how dangerous these things are and why you should have a professional remove them. So at this point, in order to fulfill our objective of having you learn how to report, we'd like to have to review how to identify an ash tree. Carrie will take over.
Cool. Let me pop up my share screen. Yes, I would like to stop Cliff's screen sharing.
Yep.
And pop up mine. All right. Trying to get that going. How's that look, you guys?
I see your work. I don't see your display.
Okay.
So just
How
put in the
about
slide.
there?
Just need to go to full screen somehow. There. Oh, not quite.
Better or not?
We see your slideshow on the side. You know so we just need to see the full screen.
Sorry, it it shifted the Zoom meeting to my alternate screen, so I'm awkwardly trying to like meander this thing over. Here. Can I do that? Better? Worse? Different?
There you go. There you got it.
Perfect.
Cool. Sorry. Gonna do that just in case. So my mission in 5 minutes or less is to get you familiar with what an ash tree will look like in the field. And so we're going to go over the primary characteristics of ash. Just noting that all ash species are also susceptible to Asian longhorn beetle, so they won't be in that section for plant identification. So the primary identifier for a lot of foresters and arborists for ash is the bark. If you're not as fine-tuned to bark identification, that's fine. What I want you to see in this image here is that ash have a bark pattern, especially on mature trees, that we consider to be fissured or diamond plate. You can see that as the phloem expands, it tears apart in little patterns that start with the peak of a diamond and then close back up with the peak of a diamond. And this over time will start to become really, really familiar to you in ash trees. And they can start to show this pattern relatively small size. So an 8 to 10 inch tree will have this type of pattern on it. The other thing, if you're able to reach the buds or the twigs of the tree, is that ash is in a group of a few species that has opposite branch arrangement. And opposite, if I was doing this in person, is just like your arms and your legs. The branch, the buds and the leaves and the branches all originate across from each other instead of alternate, which would be this like the similarity between your shoulder and your hip. So on here we have little axillary buds that are opposite. We have little axillary buds that are opposite even here at the tip of the twig or the apical bud. The buds on ash tend to be kind of pointed and fuzzy. The color of that pubescence or that fuzziness changes based on the species, but some people use these little tricks like a bishop's cap to remind them what that pointed bud looks like. I say it looks like a Hershey Kiss or a chocolate chip. You use whatever works best for your memory. Chocolate is key in my world. And then the seeds. So the fruiting on ash are these individual winged seeds. The wing portion of that seed is kind of like a foamy texture. And depending on the species, they can be anywhere from an inch to 2.5 inches long. They come on these little panicles together. So some people will confuse this for the flower, but this will be mid to late summer. And you'll see these little panicles of seeds, winged seeds. The ash leaf itself is a compound leaf. So where this rachis or the leaf stem attaches to the twig and there's a little bud, you will see multiple leaflets. Depending on species, it varies how many leaflets the tree will have. If we have a really bad windstorm, that count of leaflets doesn't matter anymore because you'll lose 1 or 2 leaflets. So I generally go off of the leaf form. It's a compound leaf with 4 to 7 or 4 5 to 9 leaflets depending on the species. On this one, particularly white ash, early after leaf emergence, it will have kind of a glaucous white undertone on the underside of the leaf and a bright green upper surface on that leaf, with one terminal leaf that is similar in size to the secondary leaflet. Whoever thought. Green ash is a little bit rougher and bumpier. They're going to be in our lowland riparian floodplain corridors. The leaves are a little bit narrower, but still that compound leaf, with the apical leaflet being similar in size to the rest of the leaflets on that compound leaf. The buds are a little bit less coppery brown than white ash, and the twigs tend to have more lenticels and pubescence on last year's growth. So just another type of ash that you're going to commonly run into between white ash and green ash. Green ash bark, again, just a little more rough and tumble. You can still see the diamond fissure pattern roughly on that bark. And the younger trees are going to have more lenticels on this kind of smooth grayish black bark. A little bit more mature green ash. The last one I want to bring up is blue ash. You might run into this depending on where you are in the US. The bark is a little different. It's a little more flaky, can still have a little bit of the diamond fissure pattern, but the distinct characteristics on this is they have the shortest winged seed. So it's going to be really, really short, still held in those groupings. The buds are almost identical in color to the twigs. And then if you're lucky, because not every twig has it, but the really distinct identifier is that blue ash has these squaring off ridges. They can sometimes become a little bit quirky, like the winged euonymus, but these little squared off edges to the twig. You can even see on these lower right hand, you can kind of see that squaring off of the twig. And that's really, really common in blue ash. They tend to be a little more resistant, so they might be in your vicinity and succumb to the emerald ash borer a little bit later, and that also might be an identifying characteristic for you. Ooh, I'm over on time. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. Okay, I'm speaking right now, but my, for some reason, oh, share screen, thank you. Okay, there we go. Share screen 2. Okay. All right, great, thank you. So the next problem we're going to talk about is thousand cankers disease, and what we see here are the trunks of dead black walnut trees, which look an awful lot like ash trees, because the bark is somewhat ridged but the ridging is not quite exactly the same, and of course the branching pattern is different. Interesting. Okay, so thousand cankers disease occurs. It's actually caused by a fungus. Okay, so the fungus is, so what happens is that you need a beetle, which is a vector, which would emerge from the dying walnut tree that would carry with it a spore, in this case, Geosmithia morbida, that would then attack a healthy tree and then bring it to then start causing damage and then starting to kill it. So you need the beetle, you need the fungus, you need the susceptible host, and you need the trees to be somewhat water stressed for this to occur. What happens is that the cankers will cause a darkening or a moist, wet area. And you can see from the point of this pencil over here that each canker is rather small.
Cliff, I think we lost your audio again.
All right, I have a copy of Cliff's slide. So I'm going to try sharing my screen and hopefully Cliff will be back in a minute.
Okay, I'm here.
Oh,
Can you hear
there
me?
he is.
Oh, you, okay.
Okay, so where did I die? Okay, where'd you lose me?
We were looking at the bark and you were with the pencil pointing to the cankers.
Okay, I can do that again. Okay, all right. So it's called thousand cankers disease because it takes thousands of cankers for the disease to actually kill the tree. And you can see when you have lots of cankers coalescing, as you see on the branch below, that is what actually will kill a branch. And they die one branch at a time. So the beetles required for disease development and the fungus is what actually kills the tree. So these beetles are small. Each beetle is about the size of the ear on President Lincoln's head on a penny. And we have these two 18-inch logs produce over 20,000 beetles. So they're tiny little beetles, but they make lots of little cankers, and that's what kills the trees. So what do we need to look for? Well,
we just need you to share your screen one more time.
okay.
Somehow
Okay.
somehow we lost that part.
Okay, so I'm not shared yet. Okay, so okay. Now I'm lost. Okay. Okay, so share screen. Talking. Start video. Nope, mute. Yeah, I don't see the screen sharing. Oh, share screen. Got it. Share screen 2. Share. Go back to current slide. Oh, this is okay. Okay, so where did you lose me?
You were talking about Abraham Lincoln.
Oh my gosh, old Abe. Okay, so Abe has tiny ears on the penny, and that's about the size of what the beetles are. Okay, and so you can see this vial, this black vial is full of about 20,000 beetles that came from these 2 logs. So even though these are tiny little beetles, each of them can move and attack a log and cause a canker, causing the thousands of cankers that's required to kill the tree. So what you want to look for is rapid decline of trees from June through August. And here's an example. This was taken by Ned Tisserat in Colorado. You see the picture on the left is a black walnut in June of 2008. And you see just a few branches that look a little thin, okay, without leaves. And then by September, the entire crown is starting to get early fall coloration in spots. And then by June of 2009, the trees are already dead. So it's a really quick death cycle. So in order to, so you're looking for dying trees, groups of them dying rapidly, and we have to be sure they're walnut, and Carrie will teach us how to do that at this point in time. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and take it away, Carrie.
Okay, good. Looks good, Carrie.
So we are in a good spot here. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
So walnut is another tree that can be easily confused with ash with its big compound leaf. For identification purposes, there are some really easy things that you can look at when trying to identify walnut and separate them. The first is that on this large compound leaf, there are more leaflets, and the leaflets vary in size. So they're generally smaller at the tip of the leaflet and smaller at the base of the leaflet, so they're smaller at the apices. You also get this really interesting situation where there are 2 small leaflets at the tip of a walnut leaf versus ash, which generally has 1. And the other really easy identifying characteristic that can help you is that the buds or the leaf or twig arrangement on walnut is alternate. So the buds kind of zigzag down the twig rather than being right across from each other. The buds on walnut are naked, so they have kind of a white fuzzy appearance, and they tend to be kind of right in the middle of the forehead of a monkey or ET, depending on when you grew up. So down here is this great leaf scar. It's got two little eyes and a happy little smile, and the bud originates right in the middle of its forehead. So in leaf off season, you can identify walnut from the buds. It can be similar to some of the hickories, but because of the juglans in walnut, these little vascular bundle scars are going to be kind of a dark brown color. So that's something that you can use for helping for identification in leaf off. The bark pattern on walnut, depending on the age, can look very similar to ash. And I generally don't recommend scraping or picking on the bark of any tree. But in this case, taking a knife and gently scraping or just gently picking with a fingernail, when you fleck off that outer layer of phloem, you can see that the bark or the phloem cells that accumulate creating the bark are a dark chocolate brown, whereas the ash in the photos from Cliff with the woodpecker flecking was kind of a buffy beige color. Your walnut is going to be dark chocolate brown. So that can be a helpful identifying feature. Just another bark image here, a little more blocky than ash. The flowers will be coming soon, and they also are kind of a helpful identifying characteristic for walnut. The other thing is if you can find a twig on the ground or remove a twig from your specimen, if you can very carefully with a knife or a bypass pruners clip that twig in half, the pith of each twig on a walnut is going to be chambered. I tell people are, what is chambered pith? Chambered pith looks like the underside of a mushroom cap. It looks like the gills. And that's very unique to walnut. So between the naked kind of grayish fuzzy buds, the ET faces on the twig, the large compound leaves, and the chambered pith, you should be on a good course to identify walnut in your backyard. If not, these guys should help you out, right? So the fruit of walnut is relatively large. I would say small baseball size. They have a smooth, kind of pimpled textured skin on the outside of the husk. And if you rub on it, you get that quintessential kind of citrusy walnut smell. So please do, if you have a labeled specimen, make sure you get very familiar with that fragrance. It will help you with identification later. The only other host that I want to bring up is butternut. And this is pretty rare. Not everybody will have this in their area, but if it is, they look kind of just like a weird black walnut. The chambered pith exists, but it's much smaller. The leaves are slightly cupped on the edges, and the leaf surface, the upper surface of the leaf on butternut is a little shinier. Generally fewer leaflets, but it will still have a similar fragrance, just a smooth bark on a young butternut. The twigs, again, look very similar. The ET faces are a little bit smaller, but with that little bud right at the top of his forehead. And the fruits are really, for me, the characteristic that helps give it away, other than the shiny leaf surface, is that the fruits on butternut are smaller. They're kind of like a tiny lemon. They're very fuzzy and sticky. So on butternut, you're going to be basically looking for similar identification characteristics as walnut, but with slightly smaller size and a little bit different texture. So hopefully that is helpful to you all, and I'll send it over to Elizabeth.
All right, great. So can you see my beautiful picture of an Asian longhorn beetle here?
Beautiful.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about Asian longhorn beetle. This is an insect that is not letting me advance my slides. There we go. Okay. This is an insect that has been repeatedly introduced into North America. This is the latest national overview for the United States. And one thing that I really want to draw your attention to here is that even though we have repeated introductions for Asian longhorn beetle, we also have repeated eradication. So for example, up here in Illinois, they had an introduction of Asian longhorn beetle, but it was eradicated. Same thing in Boston, in parts of New York, although then it was introduced again. So this is kind of a good news, bad news beetle, where it's absolutely devastating if it were to get out into a forested area and escape containment. But at the same time, we have had a lot of success eradicating it if we do catch it soon enough. So unlike emerald ash borer, which has really spread really far, and right now we're worried about mainly slowing down that spread, with Asian longhorn beetle, there's good ways to eradicate it in the short term. And so before I move on from this slide, let's just note the places that have active populations. So up here in Worcester, Massachusetts, on Long Island, and over here in Ohio. So really, there's a couple spots in the Northeast as well as the Midwest, so pretty widely dispersed. And you might be wondering about that dispersal pattern. So this is because we believe these introductions are from things like shipping pallets rather than a gradual spread like we saw with emerald ash borer. Which isn't to say that it can't be also spread with firewood. I'll get to that a little bit later. All right, so what does it actually look like? Well, the early stages of Asian longhorn beetle aren't particularly distinctive. So the eggs you probably won't see, and the larval stage sort of looks like a typical wood-boring insect grub. It is a bit different in that it's a lot larger, but it's generally, it's that kind of off-white color with some teeth at the end. And so if you're not an entomologist or have a lot of experience working with this beetle, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between the Asian longhorn beetle larva and another beetle larva. So if you do find larvae in trees, or if you're cutting something down and you find it in a log or any other place like this that you think might be ALB, that's a time to really get that to someone you think can identify it. So that might be if you have a state entomologist in your state, they're a good resource. Here in Indiana, we have a testing center at Purdue that can help you ID it as well. So don't try and ID it yourself, just get it to someone who has that experience. When they develop into their pupa, they do this in tiny little containers. So they make a little pocket of wood for themselves, carve it out here, plug it up with some sawdust-like material, and then they pupate. And this is where they start to look a lot more like that beetle. I kind of think that at this stage, they almost look like the adult beetle is all scrunched up and dipped in caramel. So you can see those clear, long antennae and just a general beetle shape here. It's just not emerged yet. And so that's something that, again, you would find inside a log. As an adult, this is where they're really distinctive. The adult Asian longhorn beetles have these very, very long antennae that are longer than their body. They're mostly black with some white spots at the little, the segments in the antenna. Then the body the body itself of the beetle is a true shiny black, sometimes verging into a dark blue color. And then it has white spots along its back. So I'm just going to compare that to some of their lookalikes really quickly. There are several different types of insects that Asian longhorn beetle is sometimes confused with. This is just two examples of that. If you look around online, a lot of states have really good guides. I was actually just looking recently at one that Maine produced that has a really good example of Asian longhorn beetle lookalikes. So here we have the Asian longhorn beetle on the far left. As you can see, shiny black, a little bit of blue on the legs, white spots. Now compare that to the white spotted pine sawyer, which is a native species of longhorn beetle. which you can see its back is kind of a lot more textured. It's more of a brown black rather than the blue black of the Asian longhorn beetle. It also doesn't have as many white spots. This specimen in particular has very few white spots on its back. Some of them have more, some of them have less, but they aren't those big distinctive white spots like you get on the Asian longhorn beetle. The other big thing that I use as a key way to tell the difference between the two of them is you'll notice in between where the wing coverings attached to the beetle's back is this little white triangle, but on the Asian longhorn beetle, it's perfectly black there. So if it has that white spot there, it might be a white spotted pine sawyer or another longhorn beetle. If it doesn't have that white spot, it might be the Asian longhorn beetle. And then the cottonwood borer is another longhorn beetle it sometimes gets confused with. This is another native longhorn beetle. Here, the beetle itself looks more like kind of a white beetle with black spots rather than a black beetle with white spots. And what I mean by that is most of its body is that sort of off-white color, and then there are a few patches of black on its back, versus the Asian longhorn beetle where most of its body is black with a few spots of white. If you see a beetle and you're not sure, please do still report it. We would rather get a report that turns out to be a white spotted pine sawyer than miss a report of an Asian longhorn beetle. So anytime you're uncertain, just snap a picture, send in a report, and I'll tell you how to do that at the very end here. Okay, so what do Asian longhorn beetles actually do to trees? If you look at this tree right here, it looks kind of healthy. It's got some yellowing of its leaves up here. It's a few of them are getting kind of brown down here, so it's not 100% healthy, but it looks all right, right? Nope. So if you look up close at that trunk of that tree, it is absolutely full of holes. This is a heavily infested tree. The trunk and the major branches of that tree are mostly hollowed out. The Asian longhorn beetle has been feeding on that tree and hollowing it out. So at this point, that tree is essentially standing dead. All it would take is a strong windstorm to knock it over, and you've lost that tree. Here's a closer cross section of what that can look like. As you can see, the outer edge of the branch, so right below the bark, where the tissue in the tree that transports water and nutrients up to the leaves, that's not damaged too much. The Asian longhorn beetle might do some damage to that, but most of the damage is concentrated on the inside of the trunk and the major branches. Now, what that means is that the tree is still getting those nutrients to the leaves, so those can still grow and look green and healthy, while the inside looks like this, while the inside is totally hollowed out. There are a few things you can look for to help you identify a heavily infested tree if you don't have it cut down. Here you'll notice all these little, they look like little craters in the tree, like little meteors were just kind of flicked at the bark. And what those are places where the Asian longhorn beetle has laid its eggs. The adults will chew a little crater and then lay their eggs in the center. So that's a sign of ALB. You can also, if you find any of the larval stage, again, might be ALB, might be something else, but if you're concerned and if it looks as big as it does in that picture, I mean, look at that. That's huge. It's almost as long as his thumb. That might be something that's worth reporting at that point. The key identifying characteristic is looking for these perfect circle exit holes that are about the size of a number 2 pencil and are really, really deep. That pencil there in that picture, that's not sharpened down to a little nub. That is a normal sized pencil that the person was able to stick all the way into that tree through that exit hole that the beetle chewed its way out. So if you see those perfectly round holes on your tree about the size of a number 2 pencil, please report that. Please get it checked out because you might have Asian longhorn beetle in your tree. And then finally, if you see a lot of what looks like sawdust in the crooks of the branches of your tree, that can be a sign of ALB. Even if it's not Asian longhorn beetle, something is chewing up your tree. Something is eating your tree, and it's worth getting it checked out by an arborist, a forester, an entomologist, or someone else that you know who is an expert in tree care and can help you try to figure out what's happening to your tree so that maybe you can help protect it. All right, now finally, what do they actually eat? This is really the bad news about Asian longhorn beetle. They really like all maples, particularly sugar maples, horse chestnuts and buckeyes, elms, willows. They like a lot, but not quite as much as the very good hosts: birch, sycamore, poplar, mimosa, katsura, ash, golden rain tree, mountain ash, hackberry, and a whole bunch of other trees that I don't have on this list. Now, you might be looking at this list of trees and noting that these are the trees that make up the bulk of a lot of forests in the Midwest, in the Northeast United States, the Southern United States, Southern Canada. These are really important trees, which is why we are so worried about Asian longhorn beetle. Losing these trees would have huge environmental cost. They make up really critical habitat for a lot of other species. It would have a huge economic cost. This list has many of the important hardwood trees for the lumber industry. It also has a lot of trees that are planted in people's yards, which adds to the value of their homes or might have sentimental value. And just for me, because I'm biased because I grew up eating pancakes with maple syrup that my grandfather made, losing sugar maples would be devastating culturally, but it would also be devastating economically because maple syrup is a multi-million-dollar industry. So there is a potential huge economic toll to having ALB escape into forested area, as well as a huge environmental cost. And with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Carrie so she can tell you how to ID some of these trees. And when she finishes up, I'll tell you what to do if you think you found one of these species.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. All righty. We're getting loaded here again. Sorry. Woohoo. Cool. So that's a lot of species to identify, but we're going to do our best to go over the top ones that are going to be preferred by Asian longhorn beetle. So we're going to start with number 1, sugar maple. For us in North America in general, maple can be relatively easily distinguished because it looks like the leaf shape on the Canadian flag. So when in doubt, good reference item. But specifically with sugar maple, all of our maples, all of our Acer are going to have opposite branch attachment. You can see here in this image, I'm kind of dual tasking here, where we have opposite branch arrangement again. So there's little buds at the base of the twig, or base of the petiole on this leaf. For sugar maple, they generally have 5 lobes, and all of the margins or the edges of the leaves are relatively smooth. So they have these little lobes, but no serrations or teeth. Very nice little leaf. The bark on sugar maple is kind of a peely plates is the way I explain it. On some, it can look like it almost twists around the trunk, and this varies pretty dramatically regionally. I grew up in Northeast Wisconsin, and sugar maple bark in Northeast Wisconsin looks very different than sugar maple bark in South Central Indiana. So you're gonna have to, unfortunately, become a little more acclimated to what sugar maple bark looks like in your region of the country. But again, kind of a pale gray, platy bark that lifts from the edges. green flowers, relatively kind of buckskin brown twigs. So the new twigs that emerge this spring will be will harden off to a kind of dark tan color. The buds are very pointed, scaly buds. There might be a tiny bit of hair or pubescence at the bottom of the scales or around the very top edge of the scale, but very, very tiny buds. One apical bud, and then opposite arrangement on that twig. And then the seeds for me are one of the easiest characteristics. If you can see or find seeds on sugar maple, they're really, really helpful for identification. Just make sure that they're from the tree that you're looking at and not fluttered over from a friend. So on sugar maple, if you think about sugar, it's makes you a little chubby. It fills you up. So on these, the seeds are schizocarps. They're two little winged samaras that are attached at the point. A lot of people call them helicopters, but the fruits themselves are very, very round and robust. And when they hang from the tree, I always tell people it reminds me of when my grandma would hang pants from the clothesline. So it's like two little butt cheeks and a pair of pants. And I know that's not the most professional way to explain it, but not everyone is an expert. If you're an arborist or a forester and you have other mechanisms for identification, game on. The wing on these seeds is relatively short. They're going to be somewhere between 1 to 2 inches maximum on sugar maple. On other maples, they're going to be much, much longer. So red maple is another one that we're commonly going to run into for identification. These have a lot of red. That's why they're called red maple. So the petiole on the leaf is generally blushed red. These tend to have 3 primary lobes, but there are a lot, especially in urban areas, a lot of hybrids between silver and red. And so you may see additional lobes that you run into. There may also be some that are, especially I'm seeing it a lot in southern Indiana, where these lobes are pushed more to the apices. These are a little serrated or toothed all the way around the lobes, and they tend to be kind of a medium-sized leaf. They're not very large generally. The bark on red maple, I dare say it's a little strappy. So again, that light brownish gray color, but you can start to see distinct strips or straps forming on the maturing bark. Young maple bark is really, really hard to distinguish across species. So generally you got to look a little bit farther at all the different tree parts. Again, red maple have red twigs, red flowers, and those newly forming seeds are on the wings are also blushed, that reddish pink color. The fruits are a little more football shaped or oval. The seeds are a little bit larger, and even the kind of the petioles on the seeds themselves when they're forming are reddish in color. The twigs again are reddish. The buds are reddish. Again, smooth scaly buds. They're going to be a little more clustered, but not as clustered as silver maple. And then here's silver maple. So here's silver, very heavily, deeply lobed, largely toothed, maple-shaped leaf with a very silvery white underside to the leaf. So when these flutter in the wind, they almost look silver, hence their name. The bark is definitely kind of a peeling, exfoliating, strappy bark. Silver maple bark is very, very distinguishable. These are generally large trees in your neighborhoods and communities, or they're very, very prevalent in fence rows or in wet areas. So you're going to see these a lot. Again, these trees have already flowered. They were flowering in almost January, February. They have a red flower. They have prolific flowering. That's why they have prolific seeding. But red flowers, reddish brown twigs. Here's the twig, again, opposite arrangement. These buds tend to be a little bit more pointed than the red maple, but the seeds or the helicopters are going to be what really distinguishes them for you. They're the helicopters, but those winged seeds tend to be anywhere between 2.5 to 4 inches long. They're huge and they're prolific. So you're going to see lots of these groupings and clusters of seeds forming and falling within the next couple weeks. They push seed really quickly in the season, so keep an eye out. You will also see Norway maple, paperbark maple, Amur maple, Japanese maple. They're all maples. The ones that are going to throw you a little bit are paperbark and box elder or ash leaf maple, which are kind of a compound leaf. So they have 3 leaflets, but they still kind of add up or sum to that same similar maple shape. What's great is a lot of these are in a lot of the identification keys that are in your area. So hopefully that will help you distinguish. Overall, if it's a maple, it's going to be susceptible. Horse chestnut and buckeye, Aeschylus, has this beautiful large palmately compound. So like the fingers on your hand, compound leaf. So each leaflet connects to the petiole or the stem of the leaf at one point. And we can spend hours going over the distinguishing factors between buckeye and horse chestnut. They're both susceptible. What we'll be seeing in the next couple weeks, depending on where you are in the country, are these big, beautiful panicle flowers that smell kind of sickly sweet. And that can also help you distinguish them from some of the other trees. But it's something to look for. So big palmately compound leaves, big, beautiful whitish pink panicles. Sometimes you'll get a horse chestnut with a red or a ruby red colored flower. And the bark is really this weird kind of pocked, I hate to say this and I use it a lot, it just kind of looks like crap. Like buckeye bark and horse chestnut bark is not the beautiful characteristic or identifying characteristic of this species. But if you're looking at it, you're finding opposite branch arrangement and these big crazy leaves, this can be helpful in that it's not a very distinguishable bark and it's a little, it doesn't look great. Big buds. We did a post for Arbor Day. We like big buds. And buckeyes and horse chestnuts do not disappoint. On horse chestnut, that bud, you can see in this image, is going to be sticky. It's almost like it's dipped in honey with these big, flat, scaly bud scales covering everything. So the leaves and the flowers are all packed in that big bud at the tip of the branch. The fruits are buckeyes. So again, that nice brown, kind of chestnutty color fruit with the little white abscission point. They're covered in a yellowy husk. Horse chestnuts have the kind of like pointed spurs on that husk. Buckeyes are going to be smooth, but both very, very prolific, end of August, beginning of September, and can be helpful in identification or confirmation of your identification of that species. Willow, oh, willow. Long, strappy leaves with a central mid-vein. There's a big, broad range of willows, most commonly around in urban areas are going to be weeping willows because people plant them because they like the aesthetic. And this is just getting familiar. With willows, they have very, very tiny buds that are pressed tight up against the twig. These are the flowers and the fruit. If you're getting early cottonwood fluff, I'm making air quotes, you may have a flowering willow nearby, and that's something to check out. But again, black willow, they're going to be generally in wet areas or planted in urban landscapes intentionally by people. And they've got these very, very tiny, smooth buds that are pressed up against the twig, or a very slender, finely serrated leaf with a central mid-vein that's prolific or predominant. These are lesser species, so I'm going to skip at this point and hand it back to Elizabeth. But we're all very familiar with the overly planted urban river birch. And it's exfoliating bark, and our sycamores that can look like maples but have very, very fuzzy or pubescent leaves, and this very, very distinguishable exfoliating bark. So thanks so much, you guys. If you have more questions about identification, you can always check in with me.
All right, I'm going to wrap up quickly so that we can get on to questions. I just wanted to end with a little bit of information about what you can do. So the first thing you can do is, particularly if you have emerald ash borer, or if you're worried about emerald ash borer and you have trees you've been treating, keep treating them. That's a really effective way to prevent your trees from dying from emerald ash borer. This doesn't apply as much to wood boring insects, but it's just a good tip all around to avoid spreading invasive insects is check all your belongings after you finish traveling. Check your car for things like egg masses. That's more for something like gypsy moth or spotted lanternfly, which we'll be talking about next week. And then finally, keep an eye out. What I like to tell people is you don't have to learn every invasive species, just learn the ones you're most likely to run into in your daily life. So if you like to garden, learn the ones you're likely to see in your garden. If you like to go for walks in the forest, learn the ones that are wood-boring insects and learn their signs so you know how to recognize them if you see them, like those perfectly round exit holes on the Asian longhorned beetle. And if you do see one of these insects, what you should do is send in a report. So there are a few ways to do that. I'm going to go over the ones that are more specific to the area of the country that I'm in. So that's the Great Lakes region in the Midwest. So EdMaps is the first one. This is a website that collects invasive species information. Any invasive species reports on here are sent to an expert who will evaluate them. And then if it's a credible report, potentially send someone out to check it out. EdMaps does work for the entire United States and parts of Canada. So wherever you are, you can use EdMaps if you're in North America, essentially. The Great Lakes EDN app is an app that's associated with EdMaps that works for the Great Lakes region. You can report any invasive pests from insects to plants on here, same with EdMaps. This one is specific to the Great Lakes region, but you should be able to find one for your area as well. You can also call 1-866-NO-EXOTIC or 1-866-663-9684, which is a reporting hotline for invasive species. Check out reportinvasive.com if you're in Indiana and you forget all this information. It'll give you a refresher on how to do that, as well as a lot of other great invasive species information. Or if you forget all of this and you find an invasive species, just email us. You can email the presenters today. If you have a state entomologist or someone who works in invasive species in your state, you can email them. They'll know the right person to get in contact with. So when you do send in a report, there are two really important things. So first, write down where you are and be as specific as possible. If you can give the exact address and the exact tree, that's incredibly helpful. If you're walking out in the woods and you don't know the exact location, just say the trail or the nearest intersection or something like that. Be as specific as you can, but if you have to be kind of vague, that's okay. We'll do our best to figure it out. We still want those reports. And the other part of this is either take a picture or collect a sample. If you are looking at an insect, the way I recommend doing this is take a picture from far away and then take more pictures as you get closer so that you don't startle it before you get close enough to take a picture. For collecting samples, really you can just throw that in anything you happen to have with you, Tupperware containers, water bottles. They're all great ways to collect samples. Then once you have it, either freeze it or put it in rubbing alcohol, or actually hand sanitizer works great too as a way to preserve insects. So all of those are good options. just a quick plug, next week we're going to do part 2 of this series. Hopefully we'll have a few of the technical issues worked out. We're sorry about that. But we will be talking about hemlock woolly adelgid, gypsy moth, and spotted lanternfly next week. And with that, if you have any questions, you can ask them now. If you remember them later, you can get in contact with us at the email addresses on the screen.
Well, thank you, everyone. I have a couple of questions here. One is ALB very cold hardy?
All right, I can take that. So I don't know the exact cold hardiness, but it is cold hardy enough that it can do fine in the lower part of Canada. I don't know how far north that goes, but it's from a part of China that gets some hard, pretty cold freezes. So it's pretty cold hardy.
Okay, this next response is mainly observation. In Tennessee and other areas where black walnut is native, we do not see rapid tree death like in the arid West. Many of the trees seem to get a thicker canopy during wet years as water sprouts fill in the canopy. We have seen trees surviving as long as they are not severely stressed by drought. So I think that was talking about the walnut beetle.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this is Cliff. Can I jump in on that one there?
sure, go ahead.
So so Frank is from Tennessee, and you know where 1,000 Cankers has been found, and he's very right in saying that, you know, one of the hallmarks of disease diagnosis is that you have to have the environmental conditions present, as well as the host, and as well as the fungus for it to occur. So when you have conditions of water stress, like they do in Colorado and the arid West, the disease is expressed very prolifically, and it flourishes. But in our part of the world, where we tend to get a lot of rain, the fungus and the pathogen will be there, but the damage to the tree is a lot less because it can fight back a bit because it has enough moisture to survive. So the pathogen is a pretty weak pathogen. So depending on where you are, that's where you can see differences in severity.
Okay, we have, let's see, is there any value in leaving the ash epicormic shoots when cutting down an EAB infested ash tree? Is there any adaptation in the new growth that would be unfavorable for EAB in the future?
Oh, okay. All right. So first of all, the water sprouts, okay, that come up, the epicormic growth that come out, you can actually leave one or two in there and sort of have it sort of a coppice method of regenerating the forest. And what can happen sometimes, if you're lucky, is the bulk of the emerald ash borer may indeed move on by the time these seedlings are starting to come back up again. But it's just going to be a matter of time for the emerald ash borer to come back to that area. Actually, the emerald ash borer never actually leaves an area; it just is always there in the low populations. But it'll just be a matter of time for the emerald ash borer to attack those trees and kill it. So there are some ash trees that are resistant to emerald ash borer, and there are certain genotypes. So some of the white ash may indeed be resistant. That was a topic of another talk we had a couple of weeks ago at EAB University. And there's active work in trying to breed resistant strains. But because these water sprouts are coming from the same tree that was just killed, it has the same genes. So if the top of the tree died, the water sprouts are going to die because it essentially has the same genetic makeup.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I get asked that a lot through the inquiry on the webpage as well. This question says, does white-spotted pine sawyer have white spots on the antennae also?
Okay.
So it can. It's a lot more. It's pretty variable. So I've seen specimens with antenna that looked perfectly black, and I've seen specimens with antenna with a little bit of white on them. So it's a pretty variable insect.
Yeah, but the Asian longhorn beetle is such a stark contrast in black and white. You know, it's not going to be quite as much as that Sawyer beetle.
Okay. I am not seeing any further questions at this point, but like I will be sending speaker contact information on my email as well that you'll receive tomorrow. So you will have another source to find some contact information for our speakers. Thank you very much to Carrie, Cliff, and Elizabeth for the great webinar. And you all did a great job. And we will all be seeing some of you next week as well. So thank you everyone for attending and participating. And we will see you hopefully next week.
Thanks so much.